All right, good morning. We are in Ezekiel part 2. This is lesson 6, and we're doing part A on this, which is the first 2 days of homework, just covering Ezekiel 44. I have done a little bit of a rabbit trail run on my own. Outside of the work that you all did, I did a whole bunch of what I call application to what I'm looking at here. When we think about the millennial kingdom, and at this point, the things that we have looked at, what are some of the things that you know are true about what's going to happen in that millennial kingdom? What do we know of? I mean, we don't know a whole lot about the new heaven and the new earth either, right? Revelation 21:22 gives us like this much information. The millennial, we actually do have a lot more. It's just you have to glean it. Have you noticed? You have to kind of pull it out of a text. It's like information is given, like we see here in these passages in chapter 40 on, all about that millennial, the kingdom, the temple, all the things. We're getting glimpses, but we're getting the glimpses through the technical processes, through the law, through do this and don't do that kind of information. So tell me what you think you know about what life is going to be like in the millennial kingdom. Has your idea of that time frame changed at all through either this study or even previous to this? Is it different than what you had thought? What had you thought?
Yeah, I've never really thought a whole lot about it. So now I'm thinking more about it.
Okay.
And I think right now it's kind of like, it's going to be very similar to what we have now, but maybe, but I feel like more Christianity will be more out there. It will be known and not.
Well, especially on day one.
Well, yeah, at the very beginning, it's going to be glorious, almost a taste of the eternal life that we'll have in the new heaven and the new earth, because until children are born, which then begin to pollute the earth with unbelief, at least in the beginning of the millennial, what we've kind of come to see is that we start out with a clean slate, so to speak, right? All right.
I was just thinking about I wonder how long that good part will really last.
Well, see, the Garden of Eden, it took how long?
Right. So
There wasn't even a baby yet.
Yeah.
So.
Not only that, but what do we know about who will be alive and living on this earth? What kinds of people are there going to be? What are the categories, I would say?
Besides Jesus, like two groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
You have mortals.
There you go.
Being born, and then you have anybody that is in their glorified body.
There you go. Exactly. So we have both more. So even though we're going to start out with an earth that's pretty much filled with all believers, yet some of those believers are still mortal. Oh, you're mortal. I'm mortal. I believe in Jesus. I love him, but I can still sin. And even though my intentions may be good, my flesh gets in the way still. That's going to be an obstacle for the people during the millennial kingdom, even for those who love the Lord and who are, as we're looking at here, serving in the temple and different things. God's going to have in place some guardrails to keep holiness in check, correct? Are you beginning to kind of see that? What else has come to your mind?
One thing I always kind of grapple with is the fact that Jesus is going to be ruling as king, and yet there are still nations, not just the nation of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
but other nations
Right.
with other leaders and things.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's not just
Right.
and that's it.
So why do you think God may have kind of left that structure in place, that there will be nations, there'll be the nation of Israel, but a distinction is that Jesus is going to be living in the midst of his people, Israel, the people group of Israel, and ruling and reigning over the earth from that place. Why might that be something important in this journey that we're on that's going to lead us eventually to an eternal state in the new heaven and the new earth? Why might we? Do you think that God is intentional in what he's doing here? The 1,000 years has a design purpose. What is the design purpose? What is the reason behind a 1,000-year reign? Why not just go straight into the new heaven and the new earth? Which, by the way, P.S., is what I always thought before I actually started studying anything, right? I just thought we died and then everything's glorious, no more tears, no more sorrow, no more suffering. That's what I'd always heard, right? Because nobody ever stopped to do the parentheses of a 1,000-year reign with me. And since I didn't have that information, I just thought we went from death into the eternal glory. And that was the end of that. But now we've learned something different. So this brings up kind of the subject matter of dispensations again, the idea that there are periods in history that God is working a specific work to bring us into this place, to prepare us for this place of eternal glory in the new heaven and the new earth. But along this journey, why the 1,000-year reign? What might be some reasons that you've kind of thought through at this point about why would God do a 1,000-year reign?
I don't know, buddy. Okay. Jesus is going to be here. He'll be king and ruling. It doesn't, I can't conceive of all these people not believing.
That's because you have the Holy Spirit already. Your eyes are already opened and your rebellion has been put aside. You have willfully bowed your knee to God, and you are not only okay with it, you are happy in knowing that you are submitting your will to God the Creator. There are a lot of people in the flesh that really struggle with that. Even once they come into faith, you're not one of them because you don't have that rebelliousness about you. But how many Christians have you known even that just struggle all the time with being and walking obediently with the Lord?
I can imagine there's going to be a lot of mortal believers crossing the border into Israel to be closer to Jesus than the rest
I
of the
don't
world.
think there's going to be illegal
Right.
migration into Israel during that day, because one of the things that I got to thinking about really was just the idea that when the earth began and God created Adam and Eve, put them in the garden, his intention was that no one would ever die. That was his planned intention, right? Now, he foreknew and he understood that that wasn't going to be it, but he created us for eternal life, and in order to plan for the fact that he gave us free will, there had to be this additional plan put in place, because there would be those who would not want to bow. But think about the garden scenario, that for however long it was, which we're not completely certain on, but for however long that was, they were walking with Jesus in their midst and being totally obedient to him, and yet living life, having babies, enjoying the garden, tilling the soil as God told them to do, filling the earth, right? So they had an understanding about life that was overshadowed with the perspective of the presence of God with them. So when we go to the millennial kingdom, that's going to be similar. His presence will be there. When you think about the instruction that God is giving Israel and telling them, you must come every year to worship me. There's a system in place. They must come. And if they don't, no rain on them. That's the one that we know real well. So there's another piece of information about that time frame. We know.
Bob's not getting rain.
Yeah, nope, no rain on his land. Listen, one of the things we know, though, is the seasons are going to continue. The sun and the rain and the different seasons will continue. We know that when things are out of righteous living, when things fall out of line, there's going to be a law that is going to be just and right, and it's going to be done according to God's righteous thinking, not ours. In other words, we're actually going to use the scriptures that God gives to us in that day and the ones that we already have. The principles, remember, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His principles do not change. That's why it's important for you guys to learn doctrines. If you know your doctrines, that's why Precept says never violate your known doctrines. Let your immediate context rule for interpretation. Because your immediate context, your life in the moment, may have variables, but the doctrines never change. And you have to take what's going on in the moment, not violate those doctrines, and then come to sound determinations on how you're going to handle things, how you're going to walk faithfully with God. So in that millennial kingdom, that's another opportunity for us to see what would life have been like had Adam and Eve not sinned and God had not left our presence. What would have happened upon the earth, right? I mean, a few things kind of come to my head, and it's all just speculation, but you think about free will is really the issue, right? And God's desire is that we all come into salvation, but yet not all do. The life that will go on during that millennial time, though, will be governed with laws that actually get enforced correctly. How many of you ever been through a legal case? We've all kind of shake our heads on that. Not personally, but even if you just know of people who've gone through court cases. So unfair. Those judicial systems are not set up to stand on righteous dealing with people, as God says. We have a system of law that's probably in the state of the affairs of the world has been fairly decent, but is still not godly. And the real victim, the one who's been sinned, is never given the I don't know, the benefit of the doubt or the right kind of compensation or recompense for the things that were done against them by the sinner. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be a different world than we think. We're going to see that there are going to be mortals living. There are going to be those who are in their glorified bodies. That's us. And also the Old Testament saints who will also come. We know that we will be assigned jobs to rule and reign with Jesus. Now, how that's going to work itself out exactly is still a little bit of a mystery, but I do think there are some clues, and I'm going to take you in to look at some of those today. So we're going to take Ezekiel 44 up front, and we're going to go through and do our typical outlining. You all were given cross-referencing. We're going to touch on those lightly, but the purpose of those was to show you, I think, the contrast between what has happened in the past and what will not happen and will happen in that millennial time frame, where God's law is going to be very rigid, the lines are going to be drawn, and it will be absolute. There won't be any defilement of God's temple, as there was in Ezekiel chapter 8, where they were in the inner court and turning their back to God, and the idolatry right there with setting up of idols at the gates and the doors, and the carvings of false worships all over the inside of the walls of Israel's temple in that day. God says, no, none of that is going to ever happen in my temple. So I think there's going to be some, there's going to be, what is the right word to say, refining of our understanding of the holiness of God in that day. We have a shadow of it here right now. That's the problem in part that we have with really, I think, grabbing hold of our own lives and really walking righteously before the Lord, because holiness is so veiled by the things that we have in the world that we're in. We're the shadow of the things God has given us. Even in his word, he says, this temple is a shadow of the good things to come. Well, we have a life that God has disciplined us through his word concerning, but we've not actually walked in the presence or been in the presence of the real holiness of God that brings that kind of conviction, I think, that's going to really straighten us up, so to speak, right? But what God is working on for us right now is to say to us, you need to learn to be faithful with what you do know and that you do understand and that you can comprehend. That's what you are responsible for. And ignorance is not an excuse. So there are a lot of people who say, well, I didn't know. Well, you didn't know because you didn't spend time reading and studying the Word of God. It's been available to you. So you and I are responsible to know as much as we can and try to draw the best understandings of it and then make application in our life of the things that we're looking at. So that's kind of what I think we're kind of in this place here in these last chapters where there's so much technicality of it's going to look like this and this is who's going to do what and this is how they're going to do it. And then we have to know what did they do before and how does it compare to what is going to happen in the future. And we don't really even know that because we're not that skilled with understanding of the Old Testament system and the old temple services. So we're having to glean a piece, a little here and a little there. We're getting just little bits of it. But just keep working on it. Even after we're done with Ezekiel, don't stop there. Go back and really dig into the symbolisms behind why would God be talking about these different things. Look at the things that were brought up in here about what they're going to do with the sons of Zadok. And there's this long list of how they're going to minister, when they're going to minister, what they're going to wear when they minister, and the kinds of things that they're going to be doing. And then the contrast is made to the Levites before them. We're going to look at all that right now up front and kind of just lay that out, and then we're going to build on that, what the application might be for you and I to see, and how do we apply what we're looking at here, because it doesn't feel like it's for us right now. So we want to bring it forward to make it be for us, okay? All right, so Ezekiel 44.
Hey, got a question.
Mhm.
So, when you say there'll be nations in the millennial kingdom, do you think the topography of the earth is going to be the same?
No.
Continents are going to be?
Not exactly. There'll be a lot of change because of what happens in the tribulation. In particular, Israel is a great example of that, where he tells us how big just the Temple Mount is going to be, is bigger than Israel is today, almost. I mean, my perspective. Just because it's, just the Temple Mound, the temple facility itself is huge. So, but there are going to be nations. And there are going to be classifications of people from these different nations.
And scattered over the whole earth?
Mm-hmm.
Or concentrated in one area?
No, they'll be over the earth.
I guess I always thought millennial kingdom would be one concentrated
Right.
area.
Yeah. And now we're finding out that's not true, because he literally says, in Egypt, if you don't come up to worship. We also saw another passage, I think it was in Isaiah, maybe, Jeremiah, where it talked about Egypt and Syria will be joined with Israel, basically a triune unity of fellowship to come before the Lord and worship. And so there's Syria and there's Egypt and there's Israel. Talks about passing through the land and coming and going past these graveyards, the 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐭, right? The place where they're going to bury Gog and all his hordes. So there's the topography is going to be slightly different, but there will be nations and they'll be in designated locations. And it seems like there's going to be a system of government that the world's going to operate off of, but that's overseen by God himself through Christ. Christ, who will rule and reign upon this earth. It says he will rule with a rod of iron. And so he's going to be very firm in the way that he rules, but it will be righteous ruling. And the people will be given righteous outcomes and dealings when things go awry, when people start trying to do things that they're not supposed to do, whatever that is. But I agree with what you were saying earlier, is I do think it'll be very similar to what we're doing here. And I even think when we go into the new heaven and the new earth, they'll be very similar there too. We're not going to go to the new heaven and the new earth and just sit around and twiddle our thumbs and sing on puffy clouds. We're not going to, be a big choir all the time. There's going to be life. And so there's going to be occupations, there's going to be duties to do, there's going to be things to do that keep us happy and healthy. And one of the things that God created man for is work. and you take work away from us, you take away from us the things that motivate us to get up every morning, that would be terrible, right? So I think in the eternal kingdom, or in the eternal heaven and earth, we will also have a work to do. We just don't know what it is yet. But we're beginning to get a glimpse of what it will be in the 1,000-year reign right now. We're just getting tidbit, but what you have to do is when you catch them, you have to evaluate what you're reading and say, oh, so that means concerning life in that day for me personally, because I'll be one of those who's in the glorified body. I know that I will come back with Jesus as his helpmate, the bride of Christ on white horses when Jesus comes back. And I will be put in some kind of a position on earth to serve him. So I'll be doing something. I won't just be standing around the temple singing all day.
Makes me wonder what, like my father, he died recently. What's he doing?
Right.
What are they, I mean, obviously they're in kind of, to me, I think that he's in anticipation of waiting for this day to come.
Yes.
But it's like, but what is he doing now?
Well, remember the one in the fifth seal, I think it was, and it was the souls beneath the altar. They're crying out to Jesus, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? So we know they're cognitive. They have remembrance of their previous life. We know they're waiting in anticipation of the things that are coming. Therefore, they have memory is still there. They know the things that they know. But they're finite beings, so they're not watching from heaven, the earth. People have a false idea about that. God is all-knowing and all-seeing, but people are not. We are finite and contained to whatever space we're in at the moment. And I don't think that ever changes. In any event, so there's a lot of things to really, I think, push.
Maybe they're reading our white robes.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. And maybe we're also still learning. I mean, think of all the apostles and the prophets that will be there. You could sit at the feet of Moses and listen to him teach about.
Going to be the Bible Study 101 class for everybody who thought they got it right.
Yeah. Oh, and even this morning, I got another one of those moments when I was listening to another pastor, and I don't know who he was, but he gave a couple of verses that again challenge some of the standard. Oh, it's this answers on what we're looking at here, and I can tell you because this is a prophecy for the future, and some of the things that are said are rather cloaked. I mean, they don't declare them very clearly. So we're guessing at some of this. There's some things that are obviously, it's this. So those are the things that we can put down. But to draw conclusions that you know it's this or it's that, sometimes is a dangerous place to step into unless it makes it clear in the text. So what we can do is we can say, I think it could be this and I think it could be this, but we're not sure. It might be something totally different even, okay? So we'll talk about some of those things. Okay, let's get started on this. Let's talk about Ezekiel 44 on the hall. When you did your first brush through and you began marking your key words, and you begin to look to see what is the major emphasis of what's going on here, you relate it back to your book theme, and the book theme is what for Ezekiel? Then they will know that I am the Lord, right? So that's why he is writing that they will know that he is the Lord. And this is how God is going to go about doing that. I am going to show you, and you will know that I am the Lord when I do this and this and this and this. And he goes through the book. So in 44, how is it that we are going to know that he is the Lord? And the emphasis, I think, on that is Lord. How do we know how does Ezekiel 44 show that another piece of that? What's the major subject in 44? Okay, ministering to him. Ministering in what way? Is there anything that kind of hems it in so that there is some constraints to how we minister to him?
I think just the way they are told to, like you said earlier, like the priest will be this and dressed this way. They're just going to be following his law of what he has set up.
There you go. There's a law in place, right? And does he give a real, what I would call not just an exhortation, but a command? in this when he's speaking to Ezekiel in this part of the vision? What is he commanding him? Look in verse 5. What does he say to Ezekiel in verse 5? Mark well.
With your eyes, hear with your
Yes.
ears.
I don't know if you guys have ever used that phraseology with your children. Mark my words. Okay, I mean, really, I can't stress that enough. So it seems like this chapter then is talking about the temple and the service that these, particularly the priests in particular, are going to be doing in this temple that's coming. And he prefaces the whole conversation with a very stern word to them. You mark well. Mark well what about what? Mark well what? Concerning my statutes. He follows that then in verses 6 all the way through 9 in particular by reminding them about something. What?
That you didn't follow that.
Yeah, you didn't do it right. Okay, this was my law before. You said, yes, Lord, we will do it. All that you've said, we will obey. And then you very quickly proceeded to not do that, right? And as a matter of fact, generationally, it got worse and worse and worse, right? Until we got to this place here where beginning in 605 BC, God began to remove Israel off her land, disciplining her. A few years later, in 597, disciplining her again. She still isn't getting it. So finally, in 586, that's the grand finale where I am done. And he has now removed all of Israel off her land. And the land is being given its 70 years of sabbatical rest that they were required by law to give. And now God says, do you remember what caused me to have to take you off the land? And what does he say about that?
Enough.
Yeah, it's not going to happen again.
Is enough.
Never again. This is enough. I've had enough. Okay, so one of the things that we have seen repeated over and over and over throughout the whole book of Ezekiel is in that day, when I bring them back to the land, and I think he's literally speaking in particular when it's speaking about the eschatology statements, he's speaking about this millennial reign. When I bring them back and I bring them into the millennial 1,000-year reign that I will rule and reign over, I'm going to put them on their land. And when I do that, what are they going to do? What are they going to be? His people. You will be my people.
They will be obedient.
And you will be obedient. And I will be your God. And the inference there is, whose gods will they not have? All the other gods. Those are going to be gone. It's not going to happen. So he really has already, I think, prefaced these last chapters here by repeatedly through, at least quite frequently anyway, through the book of Ezekiel, he's been saying over and over, in that day, this is how it's going to be. In that day, this is how it's going to be. You will be my people. I will be your God. You will be obedient to me. And these things are not going to happen ever again in my presence. And I will not permit it. And trust me, if there's any violation, it will be dealt with swiftly and righteously. And God, so even in that, the fact that you know that there are going to be some who will rebel and there's going to be righteous judgment, what does that tell you then about in that day? Besides just the judgment, what might the judgment sometimes be? It might be death. So what do we know it will take on in the 1,000-year reign? There'll be some death. It may not be a lot of it. We know that because scriptures say that if someone dies at 100, it will be as if they are youth. So we know longevity of life, that's another piece we know, is going to be the standard, longevity of life, very much like in the Garden of Eden. We know that righteousness will be there, so there are going to be some who will be probably put to death if they violate the law significantly enough. And God is saying here in this 44, my temple, my holy temple, it is not going to be disgraced again. Mark my words. Mark well my statutes concerning all the statutes. And you shall say to the rebellious ones. So now he's in this vision about something that's going to happen down here on the timeline and back now he's referring back to what has just happened, why they're off their land, why Ezekiel is standing there before them talking. And he's saying, now, mark well, rebellious ones, you will not do this again. Okay, so concerning Ezekiel 44, on the whole, he does then, after that, he goes into all the things that the legalistic, the structural outline of what's going to happen. So Ezekiel 44 primarily is focused on what? How did you title Ezekiel 44? Oh, pardon? Very good. Oh, Carol, high five, girl. You get a star. Statues for the temple. That's an excellent title. And anything in that category, often because what you did is you took it directly out of verse 5, and that's what you want to do when you're titling a chapter, is find something in the text, some verse that kind of crystallizes what is going on the whole, throughout the whole message of that particular chapter. So he's speaking about concerning all the statutes of the house of the Lord and concerning all its laws, mark well, and then he goes on to explain all the different things. He's going to mark these things well. Now, it would be beneficial if you'd look up that subject of mark well. I did. I got to find where I put it, though. Let's see. Mark well. What does mark well mean? Did anybody do a word study on that? Mark well, since it's a key word it's actually not just a key word, it is really the key on this. Mark well the statutes of the house, right? So what do you see as mark well when you look that up? Okay, just give it a guess, girls. Give it a guess. If you said that to your, there you go. Because
Every time I hear that, I just keep thinking of Clash of the Titans, because there's that big Mark well, it's like
I've never
Zeus
seen that one,
descended
but
his son up, and that's the first time I ever heard it as a kid. It's
oh, I can remember when my mother would if she would get real upset, it'd be mark well, you mark well, you hear me. So it literally mark well. Okay, let me just give you the definition. It's number 7760. You can write this into your observation worksheet. It means to put, to place, to set, to appoint, to establish, or to determine. Then you can expound on that. In other words, it's intentional. It's determined. It's a determination.
When I read it, I took it back to in 40 when we looked at give attention.
Give attention to, there you go. And give attention to the point that these are the set limitations and the boundaries, and it will be done exactly as I am showing you and telling you, and you do not deviate. No deviation, right? That which has been planned and purposed. And as a matter of fact, he says in the Dictionary of Biblical Languages, it translates that word mark well, translates scowl. Oh. So it's an angry statement in a way of saying, it's exactly what we think. Mark my words well. It's a person that's angry and saying, you will do it my way, right? So there's no deviation.
We've got a young associate pastor at our church, and that through his occasionally, one particular sermon, he would be trying to make his point, and he'd say, look at me.
Look at me. Pay attention. Yes.
And then the next time he preached, it was, listen to me.
Yes. Yes. Are you hearing me? Look up here, pay attention. Okay, yes. So that, and in fact, is actually, I think, the emphasis in this entire chapter here is God is saying to you, mark well, and I'm going to tell you what I expect from you. You mark it well. Do not deviate from what I'm saying. You deviated before, he expounds on that, and you're not going to do that again. Okay, so that is mark well, and you can write that down on your observation worksheet. And let's title this then. So the titling on this, tell me your title again. I'll use yours.
Statutes for the temple.
statutes for the temple. I'm going to add to it. Mark well.
So are the statutes and laws of the temple, is that the law of the house that we had
Of
previously?
Yes. Of my house. Yes. So so mark well my statutes. What he's saying is, I'm going to give you the statutes now. They're slightly different, by the way, aren't they, from the Old Testament, the way God did them in the Old Testament? There are some very slight variations, but I say slight. They're slight to you and I because we're Gentiles, but the Jews are freaking out about this. When they read Ezekiel, they're like, what's going on here? They can't comprehend because they haven't accepted Jesus as the fulfillment of that first covenant through the Abrahamic promises that he would promise them a seed. So they're still looking forward to their Messiah coming, and they really still are holding strongly on to that idea that when their Messiah comes, he comes as king at his first coming. But Jesus came first to be the Savior, and he says he comes a second time without, the first time he came without judgment, he came to save. But the second time he comes what? With a sword. And he comes to tread the grapes of wrath, and he will be there to judge the nations. And so Israel had not seen the two-phase presentation or arrival of their promised seed. And so the seed came first to save, then he will come to refine and purify the people. And in the doing of that will be done through this 1,000-year reign. And the other reason for that 1,000-year reign is really significant to what we're seeing on the whole going on here, and that is the fulfillment of God's covenant promises to Israel. That's why we know in particular the tribulation specifically is about Israel. It's going to fulfill those last three feasts, which are promises to Israel to put her back on her land, and for him to then dwell in their midst. That's for Israel, the nation. It has a day of atonement, not for salvation of the individual, but for salvation of a nation. And so, knowing that God is coming to fulfill covenant promises, we've got the Abrahamic covenants then that are going to be completely fulfilled through that 1,000-year reign, so it's necessary in order to do that. What else is going to be a promise that's going to be kept in that day? There's two more covenants. Well, the land, the seed, the nations, Abrahamic covenant. Okay. Is there another covenant? How about the Davidic covenant, right? And this week we looked at another covenant. You looked at it in your homework on your cross-referencing. What did he promise to Aaron? The Levitical priesthood covenant. That's another covenant that God, and it was unconditional. I will do it, and he does it in spite of them, in the same way that he has to do so many of these others. In spite of Solomon's failures, God will still put a king on the throne for the Davidic line, because God promised that to David, right? So it's almost like, in spite of you men who are constantly, failing in your part of things, because you're man and you're sinful, and that's a fact. But yet I will keep my word, and I will do it without violating who I am as your God. I always keep my word, therefore I will do it. But I will not reward those who have not kept their word to me, those who have not been faithful to me. I will not reward them. I will judge the individual, but I will still keep my word to the principle of my covenant promises. Okay, so mark well the statutes of my house. So let's just step back through here now, do this next part. Our first one is 1 through 3. And what is our emphasis in that opening part? There's a couple of 2 points really on this, I think, that come out. All right, the first part of this is the gate is going to be shut. So when you title it, I really think there's only one thing, and specifically which gate? East. Okay, so it's the east gate shall be shut. We'll talk about the why here in a second. But there's also another piece of this, and there's one more thing that will happen. Mark my words. Who else is brought up in this? As for the prince, there's a prince here involved. And he says, what is the prince going to do? He will not enter, though, by the east, right? How will he enter? By the porch of the gate. So this is going to be the north gate. Do you remember when we looked at how in our previous times, they came in first through the east, and through the north, and then through the south, and it kept coming in and out all those different ways, and we looked at how there was an outer gate and an inner gate, an outer gate and an inner gate, right? And they were parallel to one another across the plaza. And then on the back side was the places that was going to be the facilities for the priests and their quarters and so forth. Okay, so these three gates, but the front gate, the east gate, Jesus is going to enter, and then it's going to be shut.
He's already in there. That's why he's just going to go up the stairs.
So whatever it is he's going to do, it says here, and as for the prince, he shall sit in it. Okay, all right. So no problem there. He's going to sit in the east gate, but obviously it's not the east gate. That's the outer gate that Jesus comes through, right? Because it's shut, and no one shall come through it anymore, right? Okay. So now you have to go through a process of elimination. So if the east outer gate is shut. Okay, if the east outer gate is now shut because Jesus has come through it, it shall now be shut. No one else will come back through it. Why? Because the Lord came through it. And he says, now this prince, whoever he is, he's going to enter and eat in the gate. So now what gate are we talking about? Process of elimination? The inner gate of the east gate, right? But he goes on to say about him, he's going to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by way of what? The porch of the gate. He is not going to go into the inner holy of holies because he's not a priest. Who gets to go into the inner holy of holies? Only the priest. This is a prince, not a priest. So whoever he is, it looks to me like he sits in the porch of the gate. Now, one of the things we learned about when we were looking at technicalities on these gates, each gate is almost a room. It's like this size or bigger. I mean, it's going to be bigger than this. Each of the gates are bigger than this room. And you enter into that gate. That gate now, if you just consider that it has a through there, so an open wall here and an open area here, but yet there's a gate with a roof and side pillars around you, you can enter into, just consider this room as though it's a gate. You're in the gate and you're looking this way into the Holy of Holies through that eastern inner gate. He can come into that porch area and look down that way, but he doesn't go into it. Are you catching that here? So it says he shall sit in it. Sit in it what? At the gate.
That's the inner east gate.
On the inner gate, because the outer gate is locked and closed. Yeah. The inner gate is where he's going to go now. And he'll be able to see into where the Holy of Holies is and where the altar of sacrifice is. But he's not a priest, so he doesn't enter into that part. But he enters into the gate part of it. And in that part, he can look into it, and therefore he's sitting before the Lord and eating bread there. Isn't that interesting? So that's where, so he apparently, when he does enter to come into that temple, where does he enter into? Well, it's either the north gate or the south gate. And from what everyone I've been looking at has been saying, it sounds like they enter through the north and exit through the south. They seem to have a pattern. There's a system, an entrance and an exit. Now, I don't know if that's positively true, but it kind of makes sense when you think about a system that has to be very orderly because of flow of traffic and how many people will be coming and going. Kind of like my old commissaries in the military. We had arrows on the floors. Which aisle you could go down in which direction. You only went down each aisle in one direction. You didn't go back and forth like this, like we do in our grocery stores here in Austin, and it's crazy, and you're always bumping carts. No, military is great on that order.
They did that during COVID in the grocery stores.
Right.
They had arrows.
Right. Well, and in the military, that's all of them are that way. They're marked on the floor. If you go to the military hospitals, they have lines. The doctor will say, go get your lab works, follow the green line. And you just get on that green line and keep following. You don't have to know where you're going, just follow the green line. Oh, there's the lab. It's awesome. So that's kind of what's going on here. See, there's going to be an inner gate at the east gate, but it's the inner east gate because the outer east gate is closed. Okay? So the prince, though, is going to then go to that gate in the inner east gate, but he doesn't go beyond the gate. It says he will sit in the porch of the inner gate. It doesn't say all those words, but the porch of the gate is what it's saying.
Is the second gate there, where he shall enter the way of the enter by way of the porch of
And-
the gate? Now,
And shall go out by the same way. So here's the thing. This is really cool. Think about, I wish I should have pulled my map out. When you think of the gates, remember they're coming from north and south, and then the east one's closed. So the only way he can get in probably is through, one of the two, but I'm going to say the north gate. Then he walks down to come to the inner east gate, and he can sit in the porch, and he can eat bread. And then it says he exits by that same way. Why? Because he can't go into the Holy of Holies and go out the south gate. He's not allowed. So he comes out of that east gate, inner gate porch. Now he goes to the south gate and exits. But he can't go through the sanctuary because he's not allowed in the sanctuary. He's not a priest. He's a prince. And the only ones allowed in the inner court are the princes. So all you're seeing here is a man, whoever this prince is, he's allowed to come to the inner gate porch. Not everyone's allowed to do that. Generally, only the priests even are allowed to go into the inner porch. But in this case, whoever this prince is, he's going to be allowed to come into the inner gate porch, this kind of a room, and he's going to be able to sit there and eat bread before the Lord, meaning he's also going to partake of some of the Lord's sacrificed foods, like the Levitical priests are given. Now, I don't know all that means, but that's what we know. That he's going to be allowed, he's being given a specific privilege to sit in the inner gate, the porch of the gate, and before the glory of the Lord, which will shine out through that gate at him, and he will sit there in God's presence and eat the bread. So it's a privilege that's being allotted to him. So whoever he is, he's being sort of elevated in our eyes through this. Okay? But he can't go into the inner part. So just keep that in your mind. He doesn't get to go into the inner sanctuary and then go out. He has to back himself out of that porch and come. I don't know if he goes back out the north or if he goes out the south. I do kind of think the idea of they come in the north and they exit the south makes sense, that there would be a system. So I don't know how they came up with that, but okay. All right, so the east gate. So it says on here then, the prince shall eat I'm going in the porch of the, and I'm going to put in parentheses, east gate before the Lord. And it's that inner gate because it's not the outer one. The outer gate, the east gate shall be shut. Now, so this is, how can I do this for you? So this east gate, this is the outer gate, and this is going to be the inner gate. By process of elimination of what has been told us, the limited information that we have here. 1 hour, we're going to have to hurry. I'm never going to get through it all. Okay. So that's the first part. The east gate shall be shut, and this prince shall be allowed to eat in that inner gate east porch. Okay? That's the first piece of information we have, and that's mark well, these are the laws, and this is who's allowed, and that means no one else is allowed. Just this one guy is allowed to have that privilege. And I think it's significant that he is mentioned in this way, because if he was a priest, they already know they're eating in the inner gate. They're all eating in the inner gate. They have quarters inside. They have their chambers in there. There's tables. They have their own kitchens. They know they're eating there. But this one is identified specifically that he is allowed to do this prince, whoever he is. Okay? And I say whoever he is because we're not sure who the prince is. That is debatable. Some people want to say that it's King David, but there's going to be some problems come up when you get into chapter 44 and also or in 46. This we know that in 46, it goes on. Somebody flip over there. 46, look at 16 to 18, just for fun. I'll give you some food to chew on. We're not there yet, but 16 to 18.
Says the Lord God, if the prince gives a gift out of his inheritance to any of his sons, it shall belong to his sons. It is their possession by inheritance. But if he gives a gift from his inheritance to one of his servants, it shall be his until the year of liberty. Then it shall be returned to the prince. His inheritance shall only be his sons. It shall belong to them.
Okay. So, and then the prince shall not take for the people's inheritance, thrusting out their possession. Okay. So it's speaking about these princes from the terminology that they're human and having children in this time. If that's connected back to this man, whoever he is, he's human in his flesh still. That would not be David. So there's a little question mark. So is this a prince that comes in glorified body and therefore it would be King David? Or is this a prince that's designated during that time frame for the service and the work in the possession of the land to Israel as a nation? And each of them are going to be delegated their allotted inheritance according to what Daniel's told us, right? They're going to have an allotted inheritance. So these are human beings in flesh. The way that they're speaking of these people, it seems to me like pretty much every one that we've seen so far are people in their human flesh. And the one of the ways we draw that conclusion also is through all the ceremonial cleansing things that they're delegated and told that they must do. And we'll talk more on that, okay? All right, so that first 1 to 3 is the gate, and the prince that shall eat in the porch of the inner gate of the east gate. All right, 4 to 8. In this section, now we get a rebuke. And he says, mark well the statutes of my house. And how does he rebuke them? What does he say to them? Okay, enough of all your abominations. Okay. And then he goes on to say and expound on that, the things that they have done. You, what? You have brought in foreigners.
Uncircumcised in heart and in flesh.
He brought in the foreigners to be in my sanctuary, and they profaned it, and therefore made the covenant void.
And I'm going to put it 1, uncircumcised in heart, uncircumcised in flesh. So that is what they had done, and he's saying that is not going to happen anymore. You even set foreigners over my sanctuary in verse 8, right? We went back and looked at Numbers 25, and did we see anything that when you were looking at that, did you see any information that was helpful to kind of getting a gist of what might have been going on there?
Because they intermarried and brought in.
Yeah. What blew me away on that one was God was already in the process of rebuking them and smiting the ones who had committed these abominations, right? And it says, I'm going to cut off every man of yours from my altar. This will be a sign when I do these things. Wait a second, that's not it. Oh, wrong one. Okay, Israel began to play the harlot with the Moabite daughters, right? Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against them. And so he says, take all the leaders of the people and execute them. What happens in verse 6? Then another bozo, that's my word, another son of Israel, he brings in a woman, apparently a wife, and brings her into the inner court. Why? Well, she's my wife, so now she's a part of my bloodline, and therefore that makes her by proxy an Israelite. Oops, except that what? Israel was not supposed to do what? Not supposed to intermarry from people of other religions. So basically one of the Israelite men then brought his this relative into this woman into the inner court. And so what happened then at that point that was actually a positive with Hophni and Phinehas, and one of the good things that they did do here. What did was it? It was Phinehas. What did Phinehas do to rectify this problem? Yeah, he drove a spear through him. So for a moment they were doing something right? But it didn't last long, because then they went on to be not such good, great guys. Okay, so that's an example of it. But I tell you what, even a better example of these abominations of bringing foreigners in and doing all these horrible things is go back to Ezekiel chapter 8. And if you can't remember what's going on, then that's what we were talking about earlier. All the abominations that were taking place inside the inner court of the temple. They literally had a statue of Tammuz sitting in the inner gate. Okay, so he's saying, no, that's not going to happen again. Enough of your abominations. All right, 9 to 14. This one's kind of a mixed message in here, right? Starting in 9, thus says the Lord God, no longer foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, who are among the sons of Israel, shall enter my sanctuary. So I think in a way, I don't know, did anybody pick up on this, that it's almost like here, even though it's a rebuke, right? But he's also saying, I'm a second chance.
Yeah, because he's like, even they're going to bear the punishment
Yet they're going to steal my. Now, why might he do that? He's going to say to them, okay, this is how you blew it, but I'm going to give you a second chance. Why?
This is what this whole thing is about, is their second chance, kind of, because it's a reset for them.
Yes, it is a reset.
We've done this.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to do
And
this
yet there's a
again.
lot of dead ones.
Yes.
So there is judgment upon those who actually commit those abominations, and they sin unto death, right? But yet at the same time, in the bigger picture, down the road, when God comes to bring his millennial temple in, he does not void the promises that were made to the Levitical sons, right? He said to Levi, this is my perpetual covenant with you. You will have a heir to sit before me and to serve before me forever. Remember when you looked those up in your homework? Okay, so here in 9 to 14, then he says, but those Levites who went far from me, when Israel went astray, who went astray from me after their idols, shall bear punishment for their iniquity, yet they as a people group, they as a national, he's not saying they, those who did that, but they, the people of the Levite line, they shall be what? Ministers in my sanctuary. So how did you title then 9 to 14? About the Levites. What shall they do?
Levites shall be ministers.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, like the way it's supposed to be.
So the Levites shall serve in the house, but, there's a big but, what shall they not do? Yeah, they shall not, do you find it? Yeah, they shall not come near to me. They shall not serve as priests to me. So in verse 10, they went far from me after their idols. We looked at 1 Samuel and we looked at 1 Kings, right, on that day 2 homework. And he says about those who actually did those abominations, if anyone does do those, they shall bear their punishment for their iniquity. And they shall not come near to me as priests in verse 13, right? But, and it doesn't say this, and you can add it in there, but because of my covenant with the Levites, they shall be ministers where? Yeah, they shall not be priests to me, and I'm going to put a cross on that because I want you to know that this is speaking about Jesus when he's here. They shall not be priests to me, but They shall be ministers in my sanctuary. And then he goes on to say what that really means. And I'm not going to write it up here, but start talking about the things that you know that they're going to be doing. Did you make a list on what they're going to be allowed to do? Or I think it's very interesting. Yep. You're going to be in charge of the house. Yeah. Verse 11's loaded. You will be ministers in my sanctuary. That's number 1. This is a simple list right here in the text. Number 2, you're going to have oversight at the gates of the house. So you're going to be a gatekeeper. Number 3, you're going to minister in the house itself, whatever that might mean, mopping floors, picking up things, putting whatever. Number 4, they shall slaughter burnt offerings and sacrifices for the people. And they shall stand before them, the people, to minister to them. Did you see the word because? Now this is why they're going to be doing this for the people as opposed to before the Lord. Why? Yeah, they ministered before the people concerning idol worship. Those priests who were supposed to stand in the gap as a minister, as a mediator between God and the people, that was their job as the priest. They were supposed to be there as representatives of God before the people. And what did they end up doing? Being mediators between the people and their idols. And he's saying, so for that reason, you will not in this, mark my words, I'm not going to break my covenant to the Levites. You will still serve in the temple before me like I promised through covenant. But you will not serve before me personally. You will serve the people that you by the way, had led astray. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's what I missed, is that they will be out here, and that's actually their punishment.
A
You
limitation.
can still hear, but that's part of the punishment because that one group, Zardoc, right?
Yeah.
Zadok.
Uh-huh.
They get to go in, so whatever, whoever that guy was, that like his line, you're okay.
That's right. That's right. So I did a little research on the Levites for me. The priesthood of Levites had 3 groups, right? They had the high priest, the ordinary priest, and the Levites. So the Levites were always the servers. That's what this is. They're going to be the Levites that are going to do the works. They're going to be helpers to the priests, basically. The Levites are of the lineage of the priesthood, but they're just going to be called Levites. And I guess they'd be called priests, yes. But they're not going to be the priests who get to minister in the Holy of Holies. They don't get to enter into the holy place like the high priest used to. Only the high priest could go in. Well, in this new temple system, the Zadok priest will be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies and minister before the Lord himself in his holy place. These Levitical line, the ones who committed these abominations all the way up into Ezekiel chapter 8, he's saying, my punishment to your bloodline, to your people group, because of what you did in my temple and how you failed me in the work that you were given to do, the duty that you had to be holy before me and to lead the people into holy worship of me. You failed in that. So in the millennial temple, without violating my doctrine of who I am and my covenant word, which is the Levites shall serve before me forever, you will serve before me forever, but not me personally. You will do the work in the outer courts. So he doesn't violate what he promised, but yet he also punishes to a degree. And the punishment, honestly, if you think about it, it is a punishment, but yet it's still an honor. They get that a lot of others don't because they're of the Levitical line. God chose the Levitical line to be his servants in the temple and to come before his presence, where everyone else kind of has to stay out of bay. Why? What is God teaching us about approaching him and who he is? He is a holy God. And in particular, in this time in history, because many of these people that are going to be coming into this temple to worship are still in their human flesh. What do we know about flesh? it's contaminated with sin still. They still have the contamination of sin upon their fleshness, right? So only believers get to come into the inner temple, but they're coming in still in their flesh, just like you and I do when we come into this church building every week. We bring our flesh with us every week. But for the grace of God upon us, we would be cast out probably, right? You're not in this scenario here. That what he's showing us is, I am going to continue to teach people on the earth that there is a way to approach me, and it must be my way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me, right? So you have to do it the way God has proposed. So there's the three groups: the high priest, ordinary priests, and the Levites. And there were three families of Levites at that time. And in that time, the Kohath, Kohath, were the ones who supplied actual priests who went inside. Now, what happened when we did your homework is, what did you find out happened then with those priests? They did just what we said in chapter 8 of Ezekiel and other places that we looked. But the Zadok priests, what did they do? Well, there's a time that we looked at King David, and there was like a rebellion going on, right? Where, what was his son's name? Absalom was trying to usurp his father's position, and the priesthood, those Levites, went with Absalom, but Zadok, who was another priest, another family of priests within the Levitical line, they were still Levites, but they're a different family group. They said, no, we stand with David. And because they stood with the anointed king that God had anointed, therefore they were given a new position as Levitical priests. And God says, because Zadok did that, he's going to get special privileges in the eternal kingdom. So what are we seeing here then? What is the application, or what is the doctrines even about what we're looking at here at this point? Were the Levites completely kicked out and not even allowed? No. Okay.
He's merciful. Yes.
He's merciful, but just. Okay. And the ones who were actually guilty, they died for what they did. But we're talking about a future generation of lines.
It's still like the punishment is going down the line.
It does seem like it. And so what is he trying to show us in this? Obviously, those Levites in that day are not the ones who did these horrible things.
It's the repercussions of a choice from somebody in your line way back here
Might have it,
all the
okay.
way through.
Okay, and with God, do you think the repercussions is the issue, or do you think there's a principle that he's trying to teach us?
Duty to teach so that there is no
Mark his word.
the mark is, yes.
So there's seems to me like what we're seeing is a doctrinal teaching here. That is, there's a principle of cause and effect, and of faithfulness and unfaithfulness, and what the consequences or the outcome of that might be for each individual. Now, we know this is being displayed to us through generation. We're looking way in the future, and these Levites obviously were not the ones back in the days of Moses who were committing these abominations of hooking up with the Moabite women, right? But we know that what God is showing us, and that's where God is so much bigger than we. He's not interested so much in you looking at a finite moment in time and only seeing what you see there. He's saying, what is the principle of who I am and how I deal with people? The principle in this, the doctrine in this is, if you're faithful, you are rewarded, and if you are unfaithful, you are punished. And by the way, if you are a believer, are we talking about punishments, which means eternal hell, or are we talking about punishments in something other way?
discipline.
It's a discipline, meaning a loss of reward, right? Okay, so that's where I went and looked and an application on this. I'm going to try to jump over here just a little bit because I don't want to miss having a chance to cover some of this with you. And we'll get back to the outline here. But since we're here, let's talk about this. I went to Luke 19, and I looked at 11 to 17. In that, this is the parable of the minas. Okay, and in the parable of the minas, what you see is they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. This is Jesus speaking to his disciples, right? That's what they were thinking. So the mindset of this parable is future kingdom, this time that we're looking at here, right? They're going, oh, but they thought that the kingdom of God was coming because Jesus was with them at the time. This is the disciples talking with Jesus. They supposed the kingdom was right now, just like the Jews still think we're still waiting for it, right? But Jesus was exhorting them then to do business. Let me read just a little bit of this. Okay, verse 11. While they were listening to these things, Jesus went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. So he said to them, so he's going to fix their thinking. A nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself, and then returned. And he called 10 of his slaves, and he gave them 10 minas, and he said to them, so in other words, 10 men, each were given 1 mina each, okay, to do business until he came back. Doing business implies the affairs of daily living. It's not a spiritual gifting to do a specific job, but simply, I'm giving you this mina. Let me see what you do with it in your life. Okay, but his citizens hated him. They sent a delegation after him saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. When he returned after receiving the kingdom, he ordered that those slaves to whom he had given the money be called to him so that he might know what business they had done. So he's saying, the first appeared saying, Master, your mina has made 10 more. And then he said to him, well done, good slave, because you have been faithful. That's a key subject in here. With a very little thing, you are to be given authority over 10 cities. Are you starting to see some application here with us? If Jesus is speaking through a parable to you and I about what's going to happen for us in the millennial kingdom, he's saying, I have given you a mina. What are you doing with it? That's a personal question. What are you doing with the mina God gave you, whatever that is? The second man came saying, your mina, master, has made 5. Now, he didn't make 10, but he made 5. He doubled it. He 5'd it up, whatever. And he said to him also, and you are to be over 5 cities. So what we see here is a principle of reward for faithfulness. Both were rewarded. Jesus is the one who's going to determine what that reward is, to what measure you are faithful, to what measure he wants to reward you. He gets to determine that. That's not where your focus should be, is how much do I have to do in order to get the 10 as opposed to the 5? That's not the point to this. He's saying, just be faithful with what I have given you to the best of your ability every single day. Then another came, Master, here is your mina, which I kept. I put it into a handkerchief, for I was afraid of you, because you are an exacting man, and you take up what you did not lay down, and you reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, by your own words, I will judge you, worthless slave. Now, worthless slave does not mean you're dead and going to hell. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying you are a worthless slave to me. You didn't do what I gave you something, and you didn't use it. Did you know that I am exacting, taking up what I did not lay down, and reaping what I did not sow? Then why did you put my money into the bank? Why didn't you put my money into the bank? And having come, I would have collected it with an interest. Then he said to the bystanders, take the mina away from him and give it to one who has the 10. And then he said to him, Master, he has 10 minas already. Well, I tell you that everyone who has, more shall be given. But the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. So he's going to lose reward because he did not use what he was given. Now, the opposite parable on this in Matthew 25, sounds similar, the parable. Because in Matthew 25, the outcome of this one says it talks about 5 talents and each given according to his own ability. Matthew 25 is talking about evaluating a person as to whether they're saved or not. Where Luke is talking about a believer who's going to either gain a reward or lose a reward for what they've done in their life. How do I know that? Matthew 25 Look all the way in 29 of Matthew 25, and he says, "For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he has shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So that's talking about, in this case, Jesus is going to come back and evaluate the life that God gave to you. It also is a blessing, and in this case, it's called a talent. God gives every human being opportunity to come to know him. And when he comes back, he will evaluate every single life and determine whether they came into true faith with him or not. And if they don't, they go into everlasting damnation. But in Luke 19, the outcome is take it away because they have not used it. It does not talk about going into hell or into damnation. So this one is a reward and loss. It's going to be an evaluation of the character and faithfulness of a believer. That's what Matthew or Luke 19 is talking about. How well did you glorify God with your life is what is being evaluated there. So I thought about that, and I thought about how that matches up with what we're doing here. He's looking at the Levites, and he's saying about them, I gave you a responsibility. Then you were supposed to honor me with your life and with the duty that I gave to you. How well did you do it? Well, on the whole, the Levites totally failed, all the way up to the point where God had to take, and this didn't happen just in one generation. Progressively, it got worse and worse until the point of where we're at in Ezekiel, and he kicks them off the land. And by that point, we see what happened in Ezekiel chapter 8, where they're committing all kinds of acts of abomination, and those priests who were supposed to be maintaining holiness with the people, maintaining their principles of living that God gave to them, helping them to keep the covenant of the law, they didn't do their job. So they lost a reward. They didn't get kicked out of the temple, but they won't be a priest in the inner court. Rather, they're going to be a minister in the house serving the people. In my house, they shall serve the people. So they get to go into heaven. They don't have eternal damnation. This isn't talking about casting them out eternally, but it's saying you will lose a reward. So in Luke 19, the parable of the minas, I'm just going to put up here the outcome. There will be accountability. And you're going to have to go back and really look at this for yourself to parse it all through. But you'll see what I'm talking about when you do. And I know you did not do this in your homework, but the application of this I thought was just so good. There will be reward for faithfulness. Okay? And there will be loss for unfaithfulness. Which takes me then to the next one. So the first one was in Luke. Then that takes us into 1 Corinthians. Three, 10 to 16. And this is where your works are going to be tested. There will be reward. For what endures the fire. The fire that tests your work. But there will be loss if it burns up. So there's also another great parallel right here with the 1 Corinthians. This is a bema seat. I spelled it wrong. Hold on. Fix it. And this bema seat is for believers. Okay? And that's in 1 Corinthians 3. And in a good one to follow on, if you want to look at it real quick, is 2 Corinthians. That's in 5:10. It says we all will stand before the seat of Christ. We all must appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each believer may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. Okay? So it's for the believer. We all will stand, or appear, I guess is what it says. It's judgment of works, not judgment of salvation. I'm going to put in 4 works. May receive. Okay, that gives you 3 places you can go now and take a look at application of what it is that we're talking about right here in this. This is not the sermon message that he gave here, but what it is I'm trying to draw out an application for you and I. If we're looking at these things real technically, and it's like they don't really relate to us. What does this have to do with us? We're not going to be Levites. We won't be serving in the temple. Okay, we're paying attention. We see, but what is God's message in it, though? There is a message behind it for you and I, and that is what we're seeing here is God does discipline when his holy name has been profaned. He has to vindicate it. The only way he vindicates his name is by doing what? How does he vindicate his holy name? All through Ezekiel. By judgment, right? So he judges the guilty and then he rewards the innocent or the faithful. So these are Levites who have profaned the name, even the privilege of the house or the line of the Levites, this covenant that God gave them. But because it's a covenant, it's a perpetual covenant for all time, for eternity, forever, it says. He will not violate. The known doctrine is God does not violate his own covenant. God will not break covenant. He keeps his word, right? And because he does not, but God will judge the guilty. God also will reward the faithful. So he's going to be able to do both. Without breaking covenant, he is going to do these 2 things. He's going to judge the guilty but reward the faithful. And the judgment of the guilty is going to be loss of I'm going to say reward, but you could just call it demotion. Any thoughts on it at this point? Are you following where I went on this little rabbit trail I took? I just felt like, for me, I'm getting stuck in the mud on some of the technicalities of what we're looking at here, to the point that I'm thinking, but God, there has to be application for us. If we can't draw this to a place where we are seeing what happened to the Levites should be a learning lesson for us. Think about this. The life you are living right now today is going to determine where you will serve God in the eternal kingdom, in this millennial reign itself, but also I think even into the new heaven and the new earth. I don't know how that all affects that, but I do know it definitely will affect the 1,000-year reign. When we come back with Jesus as his helpmate, we will have already gone before this bema seat and been rewarded for the things that we did in the flesh, whether good or evil. If evil, as a believer, if you've done evil, you lose reward. if you've done good, there will be benefit. And as it said in this particular parable, he's going to give by each one according to their, wrong one, sorry. Okay. Do business until I come back, but if you've been faithful, then I'm going to give you authority over cities. So he's literally talking about what position in life you're going to stand in that 1,000-year reign. It's going to be determined by how faithful you are in this life.
It reminds me, I can't think of what it is, my mind's kind of blank on it, but the psalm that says that even at the outer gates of heaven, where the temple is much greater than
Yes,
anything.
right.
But
But
like you're going to be, you could be at that very outer
do you
gate
want to be a
rather than-
gatekeeper
All right.
and serving the people, or do you want to go
Yes.
into this place with the Zadok
Right.
princes and or priests rather, and be in the inner circle of the grace of God, serving Him in a higher capacity? I mean, we should be shooting for the stars. It's not that we're working for God's favor in that way. We are doing it for His glory, right? So your motive has to be correct. I had it written in here. Number one, I have a couple points in here. Be aware of this. There is proportional results that he shows us in that parable in Luke 19. One got 10 and one got 5, right? And then later he says, now take away from the one who was unfaithful and give it to the first guy who was the most faithful. So what we're seeing is God is evaluating who can handle how much, how faithful will they be, how faithful were they before is going to show him how faithful you will be in the millennial kingdom as well. But be aware of this. It is God who gives the increase. So we don't want to lose sight on that. If you have a ministry and you have been pouring your heart into it for years and years, and you feel like you're seeing very little, that you cannot look at the superficial. God is the one who really sees the bigger picture, the spiritual ramifications of all that you have done. And what's most important to Him in this particular subject matter here is your commitment, your faithfulness, your sincerity, your devotion. How much effort did you put into serving God and glorifying His name in the life that you're living right now? That's what He's looking for. He's not looking for product or necessarily, but the outcome of faithfulness is what He's looking at. So many times results are only seen by God, so don't distress over results, but focus on your faithfulness. Okay, so that was one thing that God brought to my mind. But the reward to rule is a real thing. I mean, God is teaching us through these parables. There is literally going to be a place in that kingdom for you. Where will it be? What will you be doing? How faithful are you being to Him in the life that God has given you? And every one of us have different talents, different abilities, different assets, things that are given to us, financial or skill-wise. Some are much more talented than other people. But God's not looking at that. In that parable, He gave each one of them a talent, and He stood back and said, what are you going to do with it? How do you know that the guy that was given 1 and he made 10, maybe he had all the negatives in the eyes of the world stacked against him, and yet he was the most faithful. And so he produced tenfold. We don't know what produced that tenfold. It may not be something you see externally as you evaluate your own personal life. I struggle with that sometimes. I consider when I pour my life into hours and hours of the things that I do, and I feel like sometimes, what am I, am I having an effect? What's going on here? But God is not looking at my outcome. He's looking at my life. He's saying, Katie, what have you done in your faithfulness to attempt to glorify me? But the outcome is in God's hands. I loved, it actually says that in, was Paul's? There was a passage. It's in Corinthians, where if you read the first Corinthians passage, it's some are of Paul, some are of Apollo, some are of whatever, and he says, but it's God who gives the increase. He says you got to get your eyes off the people, you got to get your eyes on Jesus, and you have to let God do the work. but you have to be faithful, and that's what he's shooting at. I think that's the message here for you and I. If we want to make an application of what we're looking at here today, it's this. Are you being faithful in things? Because if not, there is a reward and there is a loss if you're not faithful in what God is giving you. Okay, now back to the grunge. Back to the nitty gritty here. Okay, so now we'll move on to then the positive side of this, or at least it seems more positive. I still think the Levites are blessed, right? God still loves them. He's still faithful to his covenant promise. They still get to go into the temple service. They're still going to be exalted above all the rest of us who don't get to go into that area at all, right? So it's not like he threw them away, but they did lose. They were demoted. They were supposed to be where the Zadok priests are going to be. So, and by the way, the Zadoks are still the Levitical line. Okay? All right, so now we're going to be at 15 to 27. And now we're talking about the sons of Zadok. Concerning them, what are we learning?
They're the only ones to minister to God.
Yeah. They come near to me, come near as priests, and it's to minister to me. Wow, that is so cool. Now, I really think they're both blessed because they're both going to be in the service to the Lord. They're both going to be in the holy place in the inner sanctuary. They're both exalted in the eyes even of their people by being priests. It's a privilege that was bestowed on them. They didn't earn, by the way. It's by grace, right? You're born a Levite. That's not something you did. You were born, right? You just positionally got blessed. But you are responsible to be faithful in the doing of it. And boy, was he stern. Mark my words. Mark well. See with your eyes and hear with your ears all that I say to you concerning all the statutes of the house of the Lord and concerning all of its laws. And mark well the entrance of the house and all exits of the sanctuary. So apparently there are entrances and exits. I think that might be where they come up with the idea you come in from the north and exit the south. But he's also saying you mark well these exits and these entrances, because the very first thing he says is the east gate shall be shut. Once I've come in, it's shut. Why? Because the Lord entered by it. It's holy, and it's to be remembered and revered in that way. It's a sign that I have entered, and not anyone can enter except by the way I tell them. And then the prince shall eat in that porch. Enough of all your abominations. So he rebukes them. And then he goes on to say, because of this rebuke that he brings up, he says, you were demoted. But I'm not kicking you out because I gave you a covenant promise. Doctrine. Don't violate your own doctrines. God does not break covenant. So the Levites shall serve me, but they shall minister to the people. So here's the people, right? They get to serve the people. But these sons of Zadok, they were faithful. And generationally they were faithful. And I'm going to reward them with service to me personally. They are ministering to me. Now there's a long list. Let's just talk about what do we see. Starting in 15. What do we see them doing? Boy, you could make a long list. It's really interesting. What did you see there?
First thing is they get to come near to me,
Mm-hmm.
minister to me.
Okay.
They offer the blood, the fat, and the blood.
Okay. I love that. Come near. Is it my temple or table? Okay, thank you. To my table. I keep my charge. They shall enter my sanctuary. Now, I don't know what faithfulness is going to result for you and I personally in the millennial kingdom, but for the Zadok priests, it's this. And if our rewards are anywhere near as gratifying, and I think they all will be, that motivates me to be faithful in my serving God every single day. Whether it's being a good wife, a good sister, a good neighbor, whether it's serving, whether it's preaching, giving the gospel out, whether it's exhorting and comforting, whether it's whatever your spiritual gift is, whatever you're doing, teaching, right? For me, whatever you do, whatsoever you do it heartily as unto the Lord, for it is the Lord Christ whom you are serving. And this is it. They get this glory. They get to offer the fat and the blood to me. They get to come near to my table. They get to be my charge and keep my charge, and they shall enter my sanctuary. That's what I want. I want that kind of reward. I don't have to have the exact same reward that the Zadok priests get, but I want a reward that's that gratifying. So that's what we are to aim for, that we might bring God glory. Okay, now I'm not going to write it up here, but there's the next part of this is all about the regulations, right? For approaching Jesus in this case. So now you can make a long list, and I don't have room on the board to do it. But interesting, verse 18 is where we start. Well, actually, it's in 17. It shall be that when they enter at the gates of the inner court, meaning into those holy places, they shall be clothed with linen garments. P.S. And by the way, wool shall not be on them while they are ministering in the gates of the inner court and in the house. Linen turbans shall be on their heads, and linen undergarments shall be on their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything which makes them sweat. Now, I can tell you, I've heard some wild understandings of what's the point to that statement. You tell me, why do you think God would say no sweat? Don't sweat it.
Is it going to make the place dirty? Like you're dripping sweat all over and you're working in the temple and you're like...
Okay, now you're going to the pragmatic, practical, everyday, right? I'm asking you to go beyond that. Go spiritual on me. Why no sweat? Okay, oh, well, yeah, my burdens are light. Take upon you my burden. It's light. It's not wearisome. Okay. No. So you're going back to the physical. I'm looking for spiritual. Get spiritual with me. What is the message? What is the spiritual truth? Just like there's a spiritual truth in what we were looking at here. Boom, 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 boom. Do these things, right? They get to do this and they get to do this. Okay, that's the literal, factual, real world. Now, the spiritual of this is there is demotion because you failed in it, faithfulness, and there is promotion for being faithful, right? That's the spiritual side of this. What about the sweat? No sweat with the garment. This is the garment you shall wear. Why? Because I don't want you to sweat. Why not sweat? What is there anything that comes to your head? Do any of my girls online, are they having any thoughts on this? No?
Nobody.
Okay. All right. Somebody, okay, let me take you to a scripture. Go to Hebrews 4. Look at verses 1 through 11. Someone open Hebrews 4 and just read a few of the verses in there until I tell you to stop. And I'll tell you. I'll jump in and start explaining. My first question to you is, what is sweat associated with? Work. Okay. Now let's go to Hebrews 4.
Therefore, first,
Yes, just start with.
therefore let us fear if, while a promise remains of entering his rest, anyone of you may seem short of it, entering his rest.
Entering his rest.
For indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word that they heard did not profit them, because it was united by faith, or it was not united by faith with those who heard. For we have believed, entered that rest, just as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter the rest, although his works Therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly had good news preached to them failed to enter because of disobedience, he again fixes a certain day, today, saying through David, after so long a time, just as has been said before, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest,
Okay, I think, what verse are you in now?
8,
Okay, keep going then.
spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works,
There you go.
as God did from his. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience.
Okay, that's good enough. Okay, so in essence, if you had to try to come to a point about the idea of no sweat, what do you think you're seeing in Hebrews 4? Why no sweat? Because sweat's associated with what? Work. And what is he saying about work? Whose work was it? So what gave us the privilege of entering into this sanctuary to serve him? Not our work, his work. You're not going to sweat in my presence because you're here to rest in my presence. It's a done deal, right? So we are to enter into the rest of God. In the service of God also should be restful, quite honestly. I do think that too many people in their exercising of their spiritual gifts, and this includes me on occasion, we stress over it so much it becomes a burden. And it's not supposed to be a burden. We're supposed to be serving God joyfully and considering any work that we do as a joy, right? Not a stressful thing, not something that produces sweat because we're doing it of our own will or of our own strength, but rather we're allowing the Holy Spirit to abide in us and to work out through us in the exercising of whatever gift we have. So that I would say on the whole, for me, I love now I can't say I love the long late hours, but I get so much joy in the outcome of what I put into this. Yes, it requires diligence, and yes, it requires time. Whatever you are doing in your spiritual gifting in your personal life, sometimes it does require effort. But the spiritual truth behind that is you shouldn't be sweating it. It should be a joy. And I think that because everything God does, he does symbolically through some kind of an external thing to show us a truth, a spiritual message. Here he's saying to them, don't wear clothing when you come to work in the inner sanctuary in my holy temple in that day. Don't wear things that are going to make you sweat. I don't want it to look like you're working. I want you to enjoy my presence. I want you to be serving me joyfully with a glad heart. And therefore, don't sweat.
So the difference between being tired but not weary.
Yes, tired but not weary. I love that. That's a really good point. I like that. Because we do sometimes get tired. Well, we're in our physical bodies. You know what's really going to be cool? We're going to be in our glorified body. For those of us who come back, I feel sorry for these guys. They won't be in a glorified body, which is why they need to not sweat, because their bodies are going to want to still do that. But we are doing our sweating right now as far as becoming tired. We can become tired in doing work, but you should not be weary in it. It should bring joy. It should energize you, and it does for me. Every time I come into this classroom, I get energized to go ahead and do the next week. You know, sometimes by Sunday evening, though, I'm going, oh, am I ever going to get through this homework? I got to get this onto something that looks like it makes sense, right? But when I get it done, and I come in here and I give out what God has poured into me, I'm energized. That's what you should be doing in the exercise of your spiritual gifting if you're in the right place. If you're doing what the Lord has called you to do, you should be energized by it, not sweating. Just a thought. Just my thought, okay? So, only wear linens, not to sweat, so as not to sweat in verse 18. What other regulation? Go ahead.
19, about the swapping of the garments.
Okay, good. Good
What
question.
does it mean that, like, holiness transferred on stuff?
Well, I think the real thing here is I personally picked up on the idea of more of don't contaminate what's holy by taking it outside. I don't know that I understand the idea of transferring holiness onto others, but I think it may come along in the same vein of thinking of don't throw your pearls before the swine. Don't take what's holy and give it to the dogs, right? So if you take your holiness, those things which, do you remember what in Paul, when Paul would, I'm trying to remember the storyline now, but it was Paul and he cast his shadow and people were getting sick and they would take handkerchiefs that Jesus had, was it Jesus that had touched or Paul? Paul, I think, that Paul had touched. And they would even just, what is the right word? Idolize the handkerchief. Ooh, let me have the handkerchief. So the holiness of garments. Oh, let it touch me. You know, see what I'm saying? So I think that what he's doing is eliminating a stumbling block for the people. He doesn't want the things from the holy place to go out into the world that they literally would maybe become a stumbling block to the people. In their minds, transferring the holiness onto them just by being in his presence, that's a thought. But my part of thinking also really went more strongly into the idea of also maintaining holiness and reverence of the holy articles. Remember, I always say about the blood that it's a high holy article of worship before God, and you're to maintain the concept or the understanding of what's holy and keep it holy. So what happens when those human beings who are still in their flesh even go out into the public if they're wearing their holy garments? Immediately, anyone out there that's not been through a ceremonial cleansing for holiness, all they have to do is come up and slap them on the back and say, hey, Joe, how you doing today? Boom. Now that garment is unclean. So I think there is pragmatics to it, but I also think that God puts a lot of these laws in place to prevent stumbling blocks to the people. He doesn't want the people to worship or idolize the garments, maybe even. He doesn't say that. It's just a thought. We do have to kind of, we'll know better later, but the bottom line is there's a regulation and there's a reason behind it. And we can kind of try to figure out what we think the reason is, but the bottom line is, what did he say? Mark well the statutes of my house. You shall not wear those holy garments out into the common places. When you go out there, you undress. And how much do you want to bet, although it doesn't tell us, that when they come back in, they go through a ceremonial cleansing before they enter and put on those garments again? It seems obvious to you and me, right, Carol? It doesn't say that, but the logic is that's what they must do because they're in physical human flesh. They're going to be contaminated just by being out in the public. Okay? All right, so we have a regulation about not sweating. We have a regulation about not contaminating the holy garments by wearing them into the common areas, right? That basically, by the way, would have been a Levitical law well understood by them in that day. They would have totally got that one. You and I struggle, but they would have got it. What about the hair? Must keep the hair trimmed. Okay, so again, go spiritual. Who shaves heads and why? Why would they shave their heads in the Old Testament? And when did they usually shave their heads? When they're going through mourning, right? So why would you not want to shave your head and go into the presence of the Lord? You're not in mourning when you're in the presence of the Lord. That's just one thought. What about long hair?
Long hair that's for women not to.
Okay. For one thing, yeah, the scriptures talk about how it's a disgrace for a man to have long hair. And we know that the pagans did that a lot, that they were into the long hair thing. So on one side, it's don't join yourself to the world. And on the other side, it's about don't mourn. And in both of those cases, instead, come before me presentable. I love this. Have a military cut. I like that. Keep the hair cut trimmed, short, but not long, and don't shave it. And again, there's a spiritual reason behind that. You just have to think it through. What about drinking of wine?
Okay, I have a question right there. I drew a line because nor shall any of the priests
Yes, it is. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So no, none of the priests may drink wine when? At what time?
When they enter the inner court.
Yeah, when they enter the inner court. So what do you think this might prevent? Drunkenness before the Lord. Right? Again, I don't want you coming to work tipsy. Yeah.
Be filled with the Spirit.
It's it would be shameful to be drunk on the job in front of the holy place right there, for one thing. And also, I mean, there are other commentaries. You can go and read them, but they talk about other things too, about just disgracing the work of the Lord, the perception of the people when they're looking at you. I mean, even in the New Testament, it talks about our pastors are not to be given too much wine. You know, because being drunk is a disgrace, right? And you're out of your thinking.
But also of sober mind.
Being of sober mind, exactly.
Knowing
Sober-minded.
what you're doing.
Exactly. Very good. Okay, so that one was a pretty easy one. What about 22, the marriage thing? They have to comply with certain marriage restrictions. Why do you think that is? Yeah, keeping the bloodline pure for one thing. There's that Levitical bloodline for the Levites, right? And so since they're in their human flesh, even during this 1,000-year reign, he's wanting the Levitical line to remain pure during that 1,000-year reign because the inheritance is to the Levite. We read one about the Moabite that got married into the Levitical line, and Phineas went and ran him through with a sword, right? And God was pleased with that. So again, I just think it's about maintaining the purity of that Levitical line because God is keeping his Levitical promise or his covenant promise to the Levitical bloodline. So I think that's probably where that goes. It's a guess. In 23, they're going to be teachers. I love that. They have to, between the holy and the profane. And you go all the way back into the book of Leviticus and over it's teaching them to discern between the clean and the unclean, the profane and the common. Okay, 24. I like this one too. They're going to be judges. Just think of all the jobs these guys are going to have. There's a lot of them, thankfully. They're going to be judges. They're going to be teachers. They're going to be not gatekeepers in the sense of the Levites, but their idea of gatekeeping is gatekeeping of the law. You are to keep my law, pay close attention to it, mark it well. And so they are to mark it well and make sure that everyone is keeping those holy garments holy, not drinking wine, keeping their hair cut just right, all these things. There's going to be someone come around with, like in the military, inspection of the troops, and they all stand to attention. They're wearing their beautiful garments, and the guy's coming along with a ruler measuring his hair. Yep, you're off by a quarter inch. Go get that haircut, right? I'm just making it up, but that's my thinking. Okay. Okay, 24. Judging rightly then, using what kind of laws? Whose laws? My laws. It's not going to be the laws of the land. It's not going to be the laws of men like we have in our judicial court systems today, which are so messed up, by the way, and so polluted and so abused and so perverted. He says, no, these are going to be my laws. You're going to have them. I'm going to dictate them. They're going to go out through all the land. My people, that's you and I, who are given charge of these cities, they are going to enforce those laws where they're at also. But here in the inner court, also, these Zadok priests are going to keep the laws and make sure that those things are done. Appointed feasts, they're going to sanctify my Sabbaths, all those things. 25.
Still can be defiled.
Right.
But only for non-dad's sister brother.
Right.
The sister.
Right. So in other words, this is ceremonial cleansing for contact with death. And the other, which again goes back to you're human. People are living and dying. You might get in contact, but when you come into the holy place, again, regard my holy place as holy. Keep the law. Make sure you go through ceremonial cleansing process like you were supposed to do under the old system, and you failed. And then these are the things. So he really delineates a lot of things, and to me, he actually covers a lot of things that they actually broke. All the things that they messed up, well, not only in Ezekiel chapter 8, but historically, when you go all the way back literally to Moses, all those years up to the time of Ezekiel, and they were breaking them they weren't being fair to the widows and the orphans. They were charging extra, what do you call that? And when you give somebody a loan and then you would interest, yeah, excessive interest on people. Thank you. I don't do money well. Okay. All right. So now let's go on to 28 then. We got one more and we're all done because we're right at the time here, but we're good. I think we did really well considering all the extras I had for you. Okay. And here we have one more thing that they're to abide by as a law, as a statute to this new regulation for this system. And what does he say about the priests?
For the priest.
Say it again?
Provisions for the priest.
Yeah, but it's actually a prohibition for the priest here.
The priests don't get any.
Right. The priest shall not inherit, and I'm going to add the word land because that's what it's talking about here, right? Yeah. I am their inheritance. You know, I have just thought about it. There might be another little message in this that has to do with the coming eternal heaven. When we go to the new heaven and the new earth, I don't think there will be nations there. And I don't think there'll be necessarily even possession of any land that belongs to any one person. It's going to be a communal thing. It's a mansion, yes, exactly. But I'm wondering, since he says to the priest, they shall not inherit the land, is basically what he's talking about there. I am their inheritance. So what might that message be for you and I? Don't get tethered to the things of this world. God is saying that over and over, right? Store up for yourself treasures in heaven, not on the earth. Huh? Yeah, have an open hand. And I think pictorially there maybe is a message in that for us, that through what he's saying to the faithful, don't get adhered to the land. Don't long to have possession of the land like your brothers, because I'm your possession. I'm your inheritance. That's what you're to look forward to, is me, not the land.
And all these other things are temporal.
Everything is temporal. Even in the millennial kingdom, except for our relationship with God. The only thing that goes with us into eternity is relationship with God and our relationships with one another. That's a really good, what do you call it, a check on what you're doing. I went back into Deuteronomy 18:1, where it says, they will have no portion of land with Israel. I don't know if she gave that one to us or if I just did that one. Have no portion. So it's always been this. So I think there's always been a spiritual message behind this, that your inheritance, ultimately, for all of us, our real inheritance is going to be the Lord. I am their inheritance. Have no portion in the land. But they will have a holy allotment. They will have a holy allotment. Now, that might be like you said, that I'm preparing for you a place, a mansion, right, in heaven. A holy allotment from the Lord's table will be their inheritance. That's in Deuteronomy 18:3 and 4. And they will have a holy portion of the land that surrounds the temple and provides them space for their houses. It's not Levite land, though. It's not like this land belongs to Levite. It belongs to God, and you get to have privilege of living in it in a house. Does that not sound like eternity? The new heaven and the new earth. So I really feel like we've just taken a step forward in this last paragraph about the focus of what it is that's going on. Even the millennial kingdom, do not get tethered to this world. It's not the possessions. It's not even the place that we will serve him that's so important. It's that we get to serve him. It's that we have the eternal life that he promised to us by entering into that relationship and entering into the rest of God And then by reward, he's going to give us something to do during that millennial kingdom. But our real inheritance is the Lord. And in the new heaven and in the new earth, we will be given a place, a home that we will live in forever. But it's not our possession. It all belongs to the Lord. That's really, they have a holy allotment for food. That was in verse 18, 3 and 4. And they will have a place to live. A place for houses. On God's temple land. And go to 45:4. I think it's where it covers that. 45, next chapter, because you'll be doing this week in your homework. In verse 5, it's talking about the temple area. In 3, from this area you shall measure this length of cubits and the width, and it shall be the sanctuary, the most holy place. It shall be the holy portion of the land. It shall be for the priests. So it's the holy portion of the land that will be for the priests. It belongs to the Lord, but they get to live there.
So I thought they lived in the three-story chambers.
Well, they have chambers I think the chambers are used for a variety of things. I don't know what all they're used for. I don't think they occupy them 24/7. They have homes. They're human beings, and they're still in their flesh, and they'll still be giving birth to children, which is why they've given marriage laws. Don't marry this, but marry this. Yeah. So it literally 45 gives us more information. So you have to go to 45:4 to get. They will have places for the houses on God's temple land.
Okay, so I'm just going to throw something as like kind of an aside, but here we are up to chapter 44. Where we start, like chapter 40, we pretty much start with the millennial kingdom.
Mhm.
How can people read this and think that's some spiritual kingdom?
I know.
There's an awful lot of weird rules that are just
Not only
spiritual, and we're in it now.
And the technicality, it's this size, it's this many spaces, this much cubics, it's do this and don't do that. And by the way, it goes on to talk later. They're going to be having children. When it talks about that prince later on, that prince is going to bear, I think it was in 48 maybe, or 47 where I saw it, I can't remember now. But it talks about the princes. Now whoever this prince is over here, that shall sit in the porch of the east gate, it doesn't name him. I know a lot of people go back to those previous verses. One of the ones that I went back to was in 33 or, hold on. In 34. Okay, let's go back to 34. I do want to tweak this just a little bit because we talked about this before. It says in 34, verse 23, then I will set over them one shepherd, my shepherd David, now, or my servant David. Now, that is Jesus, absolutely. And he will feed them. He will feed them himself and be their shepherd. And I will be their God. And my servant David will be prince among them. Now, that could be speaking, your interpretation could be basically two different things. One could be is speaking of King David himself, or it could be speaking of the two offices of Jesus as shepherd and king. Daniel chapter 11 speaks of Messiah the prince, or Daniel 7 speaks of Messiah the prince coming. Daniel 9, sorry, I'm going to get the right chapter. Daniel 9, we're in the prophecy to Israel that in that day these are the things that are going to happen. And it lays out history. Messiah the prince is Jesus. So he's referred to as the prince there. So this could be speaking about, first he's going to be their shepherd and he's going to be their king. Could be speaking of Jesus, God, and then maybe David himself, physical David, which is what a lot of people talk about. I still keep thinking, though, that everything that he's pointing to whenever he speaks of these prophetic things is God's prophetic fulfillment of all these covenants that he's made. And to me, if it's speaking about anything about David, it's the fulfillment of the Davidic promise, not specifically about David. But everybody's arguing about that, and so we'll just let that lay. But I'm just saying, this prince over here, some people say, oh, this is talking about David. King David's going to come and do this. The thing is, whoever this person is, there are too many other issues. What was it that I wrote it down somewhere? One of the things is in 44:22, he offers sacrifices for sin, this prince, or the princes do, it says in general. Well, David's already saved in his glorified body. That doesn't quite make sense. And these princes on the whole, it says in 46:16-18 that they have children. So unless they're using that term prince and meaning two different groups of people, the glorified body people or the physical body people, then they're mixing information that it's impossible for us to dissect apart and know which one is being meant. So I would just say, on the whole, whoever the prince is, he's the prince. And we don't really necessarily have to know, is that David or is that someone else? And if you want to absolutely say, oh, that's David, okay, that's fine. It doesn't say that, but if that's where you want to go with it, it's fine. We know David will be there, just like you and I will be there, because David belongs to the Lord. So, all right, we went over a little, but not too bad. Oh, no class next week. Why?
Vacation Bible School.
Oh, Vacation Bible School. Yay!
Little kiddos.
Yeah, I would love to do that, but don't have time. All right, thank you guys. See you next week.